The static hit at 0300 ship time, and Elena Voss knew something was wrong before anyone else did. She was standing on the bridge of the supply cruiser Halcyon, holding a cup of recycled coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, when the comms officer frowned at his console and said, "Meridian's relay just dropped." "Dropped how?" Elena asked. "Just dropped. No error code, no distress signal, nothing." He tapped the console again, like that would fix it. "It's like someone switched it off." Elena set down her coffee. She was 34 years old, an Earth Fleet logistics commander who had spent the last 6 years moving medicine, seed stock, and spare parts to colonies scattered across a dozen systems. She was good at her job because she paid attention to small things: a missed shipment, a delayed report, a relay that dropped without warning. Small things were usually nothing. But her brother Thomas lived on Meridian. So did his wife and their daughter, who Elena had never met in person, only seen in photos sent across the void months late. "Get the captain," she said. Captain Reyes arrived on the bridge 10 minutes later, unshaven and irritated at being pulled from sleep for what he assumed was a communications glitch. Elena laid it out for him plainly: 40,000 colonists, 1 relay station, complete silence. Fleet regulations required a check-in call for any colony that missed its daily report by more than 6 hours. Meridian had missed it by 11. "We're 2 days off course if we divert," Reyes said. "We're the closest ship in the sector," Elena said. "If it's nothing, we lose 2 days. If it's something, we're the only ones who can help." Reyes looked at her for a long moment. He knew about Thomas. Everyone on the bridge did, by now. It was hard to keep something like that quiet on a ship this small. "Diverting," he said, and turned to give the order before she had to ask twice. The 2 days felt longer than any 2 days of Elena's life. She didn't sleep much. She kept running scenarios in her head. A solar flare had fried the relay. A storm had knocked out the antenna array. A supply shortage had forced a temporary blackout to save power. Reasonable explanations. Boring explanations. She told herself boring explanations were usually the correct ones. When the Halcyon finally dropped out of transit above Meridian, the boring explanations died on the bridge in complete silence. There were no lights. A colony of 40,000 people generated heat, light, radio noise, the electronic hum of a functioning settlement. From orbit, even at night, Meridian should have glowed like a small ember against the dark side of the planet. Instead, there was nothing. No heat signatures, no power grid, no signal of any kind, not even the low-level chatter of automated systems that ran even when people were asleep. "That's not a blackout," said the sensor officer quietly. "That's off. Everything is off." Elena stared at the display, at the dark shape of the world below where her brother's family lived, and felt something cold settle into her chest. "Get me a landing party," she said, "now." She led it herself. 6 of them, in a shuttle that felt too slow and too loud in the silence of the dead colony's atmosphere. They sat down in the central plaza, next to the town hall building. Its windows dark, its doors standing open. The colony was intact. That was the first thing that struck Elena as she stepped out onto the pavement, weapon raised, breath fogging in air that was colder than it should have been without the climate regulators running. The buildings stood untouched. No fire damage, no blast craters, no wreckage of any kind. Doors were open, some furniture was overturned, but there was no sign of a battle, no sign of a fire, no sign of anything that would explain 40,000 people simply not being here anymore. There was also no sign of the people themselves, no bodies, no blood. Just empty streets, empty homes, and the wind moving through open doors like the colony was breathing out one long, slow breath and had nothing left to breathe in. "Command," Reyes's voice crackled in her ear from the ship. "Report." "They're gone," Elena said. "All of them. No bodies, no wreckage. It's like they just left or were taken." She heard Reyes go quiet on the other end. They searched for 2 hours. Elena's team moved building to building, calling out names, finding half-eaten meals still on tables, toys left on the floor, beds slept in and never made. It was the kind of scene that got worse the longer you looked at it, because every small human detail, a coffee cup, a child's drawing taped to a refrigerator, made the absence louder. It was Osei, the young pilot who'd insisted on joining the landing party, who found the child. She was maybe 6 years old, wedged into a maintenance shaft behind a ventilation grate in what had been the colony's school building. She didn't cry when they pulled her out. She didn't speak. She stared straight ahead, glassy-eyed, and clutched a torn piece of fabric in her small fist. Gray-green, woven in a pattern no human textile mill had ever made. Elena knelt in front of her, tried every gentle thing she knew to say, and got nothing back. The girl's eyes didn't focus on her face. They focused on something past her, something that wasn't there. "She's in shock," Osei said quietly. "Bad shock." Elena carried her out herself. She found Thomas's house on the way back to the shuttle. She hadn't meant to go there. The shuttle route didn't pass it, but her feet took her anyway, the way feet do when the mind refuses to listen to logic. The front door was open. The crib in the second bedroom was empty, blankets still tucked in the shape of a small body that wasn't there anymore. By the front door, a single child's shoe sat on its side, as if it had simply fallen off a foot that had been walking, and no one had stopped to pick it up. Elena stood there for a long time. Longer than she should have, with a mystery unsolved and a crew waiting. She picked up the shoe. She didn't know why. She just couldn't leave it there. "Commander." Osei's voice, careful, from the doorway. "We need to get back. Reyes says orbital scanners are picking something up." Elena turned, the shoe still in her hand. "Picking up what?" "Ships," Osei said. "Coming in fast. A lot of them. They ran." By the time the shuttle broke atmosphere and docked back with the Halcyon, the bridge was already lit up with alarms. On the main display, 3 large vessels had dropped out of transit at the edge of the system and were burning hard toward Meridian, their configuration unlike anything in the fleet's known ship registries. Angular, dark-hulled, moving with a precision that suggested weapons already tracking. "Captain," the sensor officer said, voice tight, "they're not slowing down for a hail. They're coming in like they own the place." Reyes's jaw tightened. "Options. We could run," the helmsman offered. "We're not built for a fight." Elena stood at the edge of the bridge, still holding the small shoe, the traumatized child now resting under blankets in the medical bay 2 decks below. She thought about the empty crib, the open doors, 40,000 people who hadn't left footprints, only silence. "No," she said. "We wait. We need to know what happened here." The proximity alarm blared, sharp and sudden, cutting through the bridge like a blade. "Commander," the comms officer said, staring at his console like it had betrayed him, "we're being hailed." "Put it through." Static hissed across the bridge speakers, then resolved into a voice, smooth, unhurried, with a strange, layered quality that suggested it wasn't quite designed for a human throat to make. "Commander Elena Voss," the voice said, and every person on the bridge turned to look at her. "You should not have come here." Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her, though the ship hadn't moved at all. The voice knew her name. "How do you know my name?" Elena said, and it wasn't a question, it was a demand. The voice on the other end paused, as if considering whether the question deserved an answer. "Your ship's registry transmitted it the moment you entered orbit. We rid your systems as easily as you rid a printed page, Commander. There is no mystery in that. The mystery you should be asking about is one you already stood inside of." Reyes stepped closer to the comms panel. "This is Captain Reyes of the Earth Fleet vessel Halcyon. Identify yourself and your intentions." "I am Subdirector Kell of the Cartesi Dominion," the voice said, "and my intentions are administrative. Meridian Colony was found in violation of a resource use treaty. It has been reallocated." "Reallocated," Elena repeated. The word sat wrong in her mouth. 40,000 people don't get reallocated. "Where are they?" "Relocated to processing," Kell said smoothly. "It is standard procedure, humane, orderly, And none of your concern, Commander. I would advise your captain to withdraw his vessel from this system before the matter becomes something less administrative. You're threatening us, Reyes said. I am informing you, Kel replied, of consequences. There is a difference, though I understand your species may not always distinguish between them. The channel cut. The bridge was quiet for a long moment. Elena looked at the 3 dark ships still burning toward the planet on the display, and then at Reyes, whose face had gone the careful blank of a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. He didn't deny they're alive, Elena said. He didn't confirm it either, Reyes said. Elena, I know what you're thinking and I need you to hear me. We are one supply cruiser. Those are warships. If this Dominion has the kind of power to empty a colony without firing a shot, we are not the ones who get to demand answers. So we just leave, Elena said. Leave 40,000 people, leave my brother, because it's not administratively convenient to ask what happened to them? I didn't say that. Reyes's voice was tight. I said we report this to Fleet Command and let people with actual authority handle it. Elena didn't answer. She was already walking off the bridge. She went to the medical bay first. The little girl was asleep, finally, under a thin blanket, monitors tracking a heartbeat that was too fast even in sleep. Elena sat beside her for a few minutes, not because there was anything useful she could do, but because she needed to remember why she was doing any of this. The girl stirred in her sleep. Her lips moved, and at first Elena thought it was nothing, a dream mumble, until the sound sharpened into something with edges. A word, not English, not any language Elena recognized. Clipped, guttural syllables that didn't belong in a human mouth, repeated twice like a fragment stuck on a loop, before the girl went still again. Elena sat there a long time after that, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. She spent the next few hours doing something she knew could end her career. Meridian's central data core had survived whatever happened. She'd noted its location during the search, tucked below the town hall, shielded and self-powered. She pulled the coordinates from her suit log and, without telling Reyes, requisitioned a shuttle and 2 crew members she trusted to keep quiet, and went back down. The data core was intact, but scorched at the access points, like someone had tried to wipe it in a hurry and hadn't quite finished. It took her 2 hours of careful work to recover anything at all. What she got was 12 seconds of corrupted security footage, jagged and half-eaten by data rot, but enough. She watched it 3 times before she let herself react. Colonists, dozens of them, dressed in whatever they'd been wearing when it happened, some still in sleepwear, being herded across the plaza by armored figures in the same gray-green as the fabric the little girl had been clutching. The colonists weren't fighting. They looked dazed, moving like sleepwalkers, prodded along by weapons Elena didn't recognize. Terrified faces, but alive. Undeniably, unmistakably alive. And then, at the edge of the frame, barely visible before the footage died entirely, a second group, taller, hooded in dark fabric that seemed to drink in the light around it rather than reflect it. They weren't hurting anyone. They were watching, standing apart from the armored Cartesi soldiers the way a supervisor stands apart from workers. Elena froze the image and stared at it for a long time. Kel had said reallocated. Kel had said administrative. But whoever those hooded figures were, they weren't administrators. They were the ones being watched for. Her comm crackled. Commander. It was Reyes, and his voice had an edge she didn't like. You need to get back up here. Now. On my way, she said, already moving. She barely made it back through the Halcyon's airlock before Reyes intercepted her, his face carved from stone. Subdirector Kel knows you went back down. He knows you accessed the colony's data core. How? I don't know how, and right now I don't care, Reyes snapped. He's hailing again, and this time he's not being polite. They went to the bridge together. Kel's voice was waiting colder now, stripped of its earlier smoothness. Commander Voss, Kel said, you have taken something that belongs to an active administrative process. I will offer you one opportunity to correct this. Surrender the data you retrieved, and your vessel will be permitted to leave this system unharmed. Refuse, and Meridian's fate will simply extend to include you. Elena looked at the frozen image still displayed on her personal console, the hooded figures standing in judgment over their own soldiers. She thought about the little girl's ruined voice repeating words that weren't hers. She thought about the empty crib. "No," she said. Kel was silent for exactly 2 seconds. "Then you have made your choice." The 3 Dominion ships, still holding position near the planet, began to move, turning slow and deliberate, their weapon arrays rotating to bear on the Halcyon's position. "Captain," the tactical officer said, voice climbing toward panic. "They're powering weapons. All 3 ships full charge." Reyes's hand hovered over the evasive maneuver command, every instinct in him screaming to run. Elena grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said. "Look." On the comms display, a new signal had appeared. Small, buried, encrypted in a format the Halcyon's systems didn't recognize but were somehow, impossibly, decoding anyway, as if someone on the other end had built the message specifically to be readable by human technology. It resolved, letter by letter, into an old simple code that every Earth cadet learned in their first year of training. The kind of code that hadn't been used for serious communication in over a century, precisely because it was so easy to send in secret, hidden inside other signals missed by anything that wasn't specifically listening for it. Morse code. They're still alive. Hurry. The transmission was coming from somewhere deep inside Dominion space. There wasn't time to think about who had sent the message. There was only time to survive the next 60 seconds. "Captain, they're locked on," the tactical officer said. "Firing solution complete." Reyes's face had gone pale, but his voice, when it came, was steady in the way of a man who had run out of good options and picked the least bad one. "Open a channel to Kel now." The channel opened. Kel's voice returned, flat and patient, the voice of someone who had already decided how this ended. "Subdirector," Reyes said, "we're standing down. We'll hand over the data. Just hold your fire." Elena stared at him and he gave her a look that said, "Trust me," even as his hand moved to a console only she could see, keying in a private channel to her own earpiece. On the open line, Kel's weapons stood down, the Dominion ships easing back from their firing posture, apparently satisfied. On the private channel, Reyes's voice was a whisper. "I'm not handing over anything real. I'm buying us time. Find out where that Morse signal came from. You've got maybe an hour before Kel figures out we're stalling." Elena didn't waste the hour. She traced the encrypted signal back through 6 relay bounces, each one designed to obscure its origin, until she found a source, a labor processing station in a system 3 jumps away, officially listed in Dominion registries, which the Halcyon systems had no business accessing and yet somehow did, as a quarantine zone. No further details, no explanation for what was being quarantined or from what. She was still staring at the coordinates when her console chimed with an incoming private transmission, audio only, the voice on the other end trembling in a way that made it sound almost human, despite the strange cadence beneath it. "Commander Voss. My name is Raal. I sent you the signal." Elena's hand hovered over the response key. "You're Cartesi." "I am," Raal said. "And I understand if that means you don't trust a single word I say. I wouldn't in your place. Then why should I listen?" There was a pause long enough that Elena thought the connection had dropped. "Because I helped load your brother onto a transport ship 4 days ago," Raal said quietly. "And I have not been able to stop seeing his face since." Elena's chest went tight. "You know my brother?" "I know a great many names I should not know," Raal said. "I process manifests. I catalog cargo. That is my function within the Dominion. I am a small, unimportant part of a large machine. But the machine has been processing people, Commander, and I have spent 4 days telling myself it was not my place to care. I have decided I was wrong." "Reallocation," Elena said, the word bitter on her tongue. "Kel called it reallocation." "Kel called it what his superiors instructed him to call it," Raal said. "The truth is uglier. The colonists are not being punished for a treaty violation. There was no treaty violation. They are being harvested, moved to labor processing for a species the Cartesi answer to. We are not the ones giving the orders, Commander. We are the ones carrying them out." Elena felt the floor tilt again, the same way it had when Kel first said her name. Who gives the orders? They call themselves the Thren, Ral said, and something in his voice went quiet and careful in a way that sounded to Elena's ear disturbingly like fear. I have only seen them twice in my life. I hope never to see them a third time, but your brother is at the station where I am stationed now, Commander. Alive. For now. Take us to him, Elena said. I cannot guarantee your safety if you come, Ral said. The Dominion will kill me for what I have already done. If you are caught, they will not treat you gently either. I didn't ask for a guarantee, Elena said. I asked for coordinates. He gave them to her. They matched exactly. She went to Reyes with everything. The coordinates, the recording of Rahal's voice, the impossible, uncomfortable trust she'd placed in an alien she'd never seen. Reyes listened with his jaw set, and when she finished, he shook his head. Fleet Command already responded to my report, he said. Direct order. We are to withdraw immediately and await further instruction. No engagement, no further contact, no unauthorized action. He looked at her, and there was real sympathy in his eyes, which somehow made it worse. I have to follow that order, Elena. Then I won't, Elena said. That's insubordination. That's the end of your career, maybe worse. My brother is on that station, Elena said. So is a defector who just risked his life to warn us. I am not leaving either of them because a desk somewhere on Earth is worried about starting a war we didn't ask for. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into a drawer beneath the comms panel and pulled out a shuttle authorization chip, sliding it across the console toward her without a word. It was the closest thing to permission he could give without breaking the order himself, and they both knew it. Take Osei, he said finally. He's the best pilot I've got, and he volunteered before I even finished explaining the situation. Don't get yourself killed, Commander. That's not an order. That's a request from a friend. The shuttle left the Halcyon 20 minutes later. Elena in the co-pilot seat, Osei at the controls, and against every piece of good judgment either of them had, the little girl from Meridian strapped into the seat behind them, wide awake now, silent, refusing to let go of Elena's sleeve when they'd tried to leave her in medical. She won't stop shaking if she's not near you, the medic had said. I don't know what that means, but I don't think it's safe to force it. So the girl came, and Elena held her hand through the transit jump and tried not to think about what they were flying toward. The quarantine zone, when they dropped out of transit above it, turned out to be a processing station the size of a small moon, gray, industrial, ringed with docking arms and defense platforms, utterly unlike anything Elena had expected. Rahal's directions guided them to an unmonitored service dock on the station's dark side, and from there, through a maintenance corridor that smelled of recycled air and machine oil, they moved fast and quiet, following Rahal's voice in Elena's earpiece as he guided them level by level, deeper into the station, past checkpoints he claimed credit to bypass and cameras he swore he'd looped. Almost there, Rahal whispered. The holding block is just ahead. I am sorry, Commander, for what you are about to see. They rounded the final corner, and Elena stopped breathing. Behind a wall of reinforced glass stretching the length of an entire corridor, thousands of human silhouettes moved in slow, orderly lines, feeding machinery, sorting cargo, working in perfect, eerie silence, their faces slack and unfocused in a way that made Elena's stomach turn. She scanned the lines, desperate and frantic, until her eyes landed on a familiar face, thinner than she remembered, moving with the same slow, mechanical rhythm as everyone around him. Tomas. Alive. But his eyes, when they passed over the glass, over her, didn't stop. Didn't recognize her, didn't recognize anything at all. Elena's hand hit the glass before she could stop herself. Tomas. He didn't turn. He didn't flinch. He kept walking, slow and even, feeding a stream of components into a sorting machine, his face as blank as still water. He can't hear you. Rahal's voice said in her ear, low and urgent. Commander, please step back from the glass before a sensor flags you. What did you do to him? Elena's voice cracked. Fury and grief tangled together. Not me, Rahal said. The thren. It's a conditioning process, neurological, not physical. It suppresses identity, memory, resistance. It makes a person compliant, efficient. It is slow to apply and, if caught early enough, it can sometimes be reversed. If it is allowed to finish, it cannot. How do we stop it? There is a control chamber 2 levels down, Raul said. The process can be interrupted manually, but the interruption itself carries risk. The mind fights the machine as the connection breaks. It is not gentle, but it is possible. Take us there, Elena said. Now. They moved fast, Ose covering their backs, the little girl gripping Elena's hand so tightly it hurt, as if she recognized something in this place that none of the adults could see. Raul met them at a service junction, the first time Elena had seen him in person, and the sight of him nearly stopped her cold. He was tall, gray-skinned, with dark, sunken eyes that held none of the cold detachment she'd expected from a Cartesi soldier. He looked exhausted. He looked afraid. "This way," he said, not wasting time on introductions. Quickly. The conditioning chamber was smaller than Elena expected, a cramped room lined with restraint chairs, humming machinery, and rows of humans strapped in, motionless, cables trailing from ports at their temples. She found Thomas in the 3rd row, eyes closed, the machine's lights pulsing steady and slow above him. "How much time?" she asked. Rahal checked a console, his hands shaking slightly. "Minutes. The process on him is 70% complete. Past 80 it becomes permanent. I can slow the sequence, but I cannot stop it from here. Someone has to disconnect him manually, and someone has to be present when it happens. The mind needs an anchor to hold on to during the break, or it fractures instead of waking." "I'll do it," Elena said, already moving to Thomas's side. She pulled the cables free with careful hands, watching monitors spike and scream in protest, and knelt beside her brother, taking his face in her hands. "Thomas, it's Elena. It's your sister." Nothing. His eyes stayed shut, his breathing shallow. "Tomas, remember the lake house? Remember when you fell through the ice and I pulled you out and you cried the whole way home because you dropped your favorite hat in the water?" Still nothing. Elena's voice broke. "Remember your daughter's name, Thomas. You told me over comms the day she was born, and you cried so hard I could barely understand you. Say it, please." For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then his eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, glassy, searching. And then slowly they found her face and something behind them sparked back to life. "Mira," he whispered. "Her name is Mira." Elena nearly collapsed with relief, pulling him against her, and behind her she heard Ose let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. But the monitors around them had already begun to scream in earnest. Red lights flooding the chamber, an alarm rising through the station's walls like a wound reopening. "The interruption triggered a system alert," Raul said, his voice tight with panic. "They'll know within seconds. We have to move." The chamber door slid open before he finished the sentence. The figure that entered wasn't Cartesi. It was tall, taller than Raul, taller than any human, draped in dark fabric that seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it, its face hidden beneath a deep hood, its presence radiating a stillness that felt, to Elena, worse than any weapon pointed at her. "You are the one from Meridian," the figure said. Its voice was quiet, layered, entirely without anger, which somehow made it more frightening than fury would have been. "Commander Elena Voss, I am told you retrieved data you were not meant to see." "Who are you?" Elena said, pulling Thomas behind her, one hand still gripping the little girl's fingers. "I am called Sayel," the figure said, "an emissary of the Thren Overmind. And you, Commander, are a problem I did not expect to have." "You're the one giving Kel his orders," Elena said. "You're the one doing this to my brother, to everyone here." "I am the one who requires human labor," Sayel corrected, unhurried, almost gentle. "Your species processes certain problems in ways we find valuable, efficient, rare. This has happened to other species before yours, Commander. None of them have ever resisted long enough to matter." "We're not other species," Elena said. Sale tilted its hooded head, a gesture that carried, impossibly, the weight of genuine curiosity. That remains to be seen. But your resistance, however admirable, is statistically irrelevant. Every prior harvest has ended the same way. Compliance, silence, utility. A pause. You should not have interrupted the process on this one. It complicates the record. He's not a record, Elena said. He's my brother. Sentiment, Sile said, is not a resource we require. The alarm around them intensified, and Sile raised one long-fingered hand toward a panel on the wall, its movements unhurried, almost bored. Given the security breach you represent, and the data you have already extracted from Meridian's core, Sale said, I am left with only one efficient solution. Wait, Rial started. This station will be destroyed, Sale said, calm as still water, along with every trace of evidence it contains, including, Commander, every human currently aboard it. The console beside the door lit up with a slow, steady countdown, red numbers ticking down from a number that made Elena's stomach drop through the floor. Behind her, Raoul made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something between a gasp and a decision being made, and lunged for Sael's outstretched hand, trying to wrestle the panel away, buying seconds that weren't his to buy. Sael turned on him without a flicker of hesitation, and two armored Cartesi guards flooded through the chamber door behind the emissary, weapons raised, moving to seize Raoul before he could do anything more. Go, Raoul shouted, wrestling against the guard's grip, his eyes finding Elena's across the chamber. Get them out, I'll hold them as long as I can. The countdown ticked past the 2-minute mark, and somewhere above them the entire station groaned like something ancient waking up to die. 2 minutes wasn't enough time to save thousands of people. Elena knew that. She refused to accept it anyway. Ose, get to the holding block, override the glass locks, anything you can reach, she shouted over the alarm. Tomas, can you walk? I can walk, Tomas said, still unsteady, still blinking like a man surfacing from deep water, but on his feet. Then help me wake them up. She didn't have a plan beyond that. Didn't have time to build one. But she'd seen something in Thomas's eyes the moment he came back. Something that told her the conditioning hadn't erased him so much as buried him. And if that was true for him, it might be true for the thousands of others strapped into chairs throughout this station. They ran for the holding block, Ose already tearing into a control panel with tools Elena hadn't even known he was carrying, muttering to himself in the clipped, focused way of someone whose hands remembered work his mouth hadn't mentioned in months of casual conversation. You never told me you were an engineer, Elena said, breathless as the reinforced glass along the corridor began, impossibly, to retract. Wasn't relevant before now, Ose said, not looking up. Grew up fixing my dad's fishing boat. Wiring's wiring mostly. Bigger version of the same problem. The glass fell away and thousands of dazed, conditioned colonists stood exposed to open air for the first time in days, blinking, confused, and, as Elena moved among them, grabbing shoulders, saying names pulled from Meridian's colony registry that Rahal had somehow smuggled into her shuttle's database before they'd even left the Halcyon, slowly, painfully, beginning to wake. Not all of them. Not fast enough. But enough. It was in the middle of that chaos, with Tomas shaking colonists awake beside her and Ose rerouting power through systems he'd had no business understanding so quickly, that the truth of it hit Elena all at once, the way a puzzle piece drops into place and reveals the whole picture at once. Sale had said other species stayed compliant, silent, forever. Thomas had woken up in minutes, not because Elena had done something extraordinary, not because her voice held some magic other rescuers lacked. She'd simply reached him before the process finished. But the process itself had been slower to take hold in him than Sale's own words implied it should have been. 70% complete after 4 days, Raoul had said. For other species, that number would have long since crossed into permanence. Humans weren't holding on because Elena saved them. They were holding on because some part of them had already been fighting back on their own before anyone came. Anyone. That was why the countdown existed. That was why Sale had moved to destroy the station the instant a data breach was confirmed. It wasn't standard procedure. It was panic. Cold, careful, alien panic, but panic all the same. The Thren had built an entire harvesting system on the assumption that captured minds stayed captured. Humanity was the first exception to that rule they had ever encountered, and Sale was trying to erase the evidence before anyone realized what that meant. "They're not afraid of us because we're strong," Elena said aloud, mostly to herself as the realization settled into her chest like a held breath finally released. "They're afraid because we don't stay broken." "Commander," Osei's voice cut through her thoughts. "Countdown's under a minute. I've got an evacuation corridor open through the west docking arm, but it's not going to hold long." "Move!" Elena shouted, and the corridor became a river of stumbling, half-awake colonists, carried along by the ones who'd woken fastest, dragging the ones who hadn't. They didn't make it far before Elena remembered Rahl. She turned back, scanning the chaos behind them, and through a gap in the crowd she caught one last glimpse of him. Pinned between two guards, Sale standing over him with that same terrible stillness. One long hand raised toward a control panel that governed something Elena couldn't see and didn't have time to guess at. "Elena!" Tomas grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "We have to go, now." "He saved us," Elena said, fighting against her brother's grip. "He saved you." "And he'll die making sure we get out," Tomas said, his voice breaking, "if you don't get us out now." She let herself be pulled. It was the hardest thing she'd done since finding the empty crib. The last thing she saw of the chamber before the crowd swallowed the view completely was Rahl's hand moving. Not toward escape, not toward the guards restraining him, but toward the console beside Sale's outstretched arm, his fingers finding something there that made the emissary's hooded head snap toward him in what might have been, for the first time, genuine alarm. Then the crowd carried her around a corner, and she couldn't see anything at all. They reached the west docking arm with seconds to spare, spilling out onto a platform where, against every order Reyes had been given, against everything Fleet Command had instructed, the Halcyon sat waiting, its boarding ramp already down, its crew pulling colonists aboard as fast as hands could reach them. "You beautiful, insubordinate man," Elena breathed, and didn't have time to say anything else before she was hauling Thomas and the little girl and a dozen strangers up the ramp, the deck shuddering beneath her feet as the station's structure began, somewhere deep below, to fail. The Halcyon broke away from the docking arm with colonists still being counted, still being found space to sit or stand or simply breathe, and Elena stood at the rear viewport, watching the station shrink behind them, praying for a shape, a shuttle, an escape pod, anything that never came. The station tore itself apart in silence, the way explosions in vacuum always did, a slow bloom of light and debris where thousands of people had been enslaved only hours before, where one Cartesi soldier had chosen, in his final moments, to become something other than what his species had made him. Elena didn't have time to grieve. The comm panel beside her crackled, an open channel she hadn't authorized, cutting through the celebration rising elsewhere on the ship. Sale's voice, calm even now, even with the station dying around it, filled the bridge. "You didn't win, Commander," the emissary said. "You only postponed our conclusion. We have learned something valuable today about your species' resilience, and we will return with a better method." The channel went dead. Behind them, the last light of the station's destruction faded into the dark, and Elena stood very still, the little girl's hand once again finding hers, gripping tight, as the Halcyon carried them all away from a place that had almost taken everything, and had instead given humanity its first real look at what it was worth fighting for. Thomas woke up screaming for the first 3 nights, and by the 4th he woke up remembering why. Elena sat with him each time, in the cramped medical bay that had become a makeshift recovery ward for over 200 colonists the Halcyon had no real space for. She held his hand the way she had in the conditioning chamber, and slowly, night by night, the screaming softened into something closer to grief, which was, the ship's doctor told her, exactly the direction healing was supposed to go. His neural scans are already stabilizing faster than the Dominion's own equipment predicted they should, the doctor said, reviewing data on a cracked tablet salvaged from Meridian's ruins. Whatever that conditioning process was built to do, it wasn't built to be broken this fast. Same with the others. Every colonist we pulled out is recovering quicker than seems possible. Good, Elena said, and meant it more than the single word could hold. She didn't tell the doctor what she suspected, that this wasn't luck, that it was something closer to the truth Sale himself had let slip in a moment of cold, unintentional honesty. She'd have time to make that argument later, to people who needed to hear it far more than a ship's doctor did. That time came sooner than she expected. Fleet Command's response to the Halcyon's unauthorized detour arrived before they'd even reached the edge of Dominion space. A formal inquiry, a suspension of Elena's command authority pending review, language stiff enough to make Reyes's jaw tighten every time he read it aloud. He'd defied a direct order too, and he knew what that meant for him as well as for her. "I'd do it again," he told her, the night before they reached Earth orbit. "For what it's worth." "It's worth a lot," Elena said. "I hope that's what you tell the review board." "I intend to," he said, word for word. The review board convened 3 days after the Halcyon docked at Earth Station, in a chamber far too formal for the plain, exhausted testimony Elena had to give. She didn't dress it up. She told them about the silence over Meridian, about the empty crib and the small shoe she still, inexplicably, hadn't been able to throw away. She told them about Kel's threats, about Rahal's warning, about the conditioning chamber and the countdown and the calm, terrible voice that had promised to return. She played them the 12 seconds of corrupted footage. She played them Sael's final transmission, and she told them what she believed it meant, that humanity hadn't survived that station because of superior weapons or superior strength, but because something in the way humans held on to themselves, onto memory and stubbornness in each other, made them harder to erase than anything the Thran had harvested before. That the very people the Dominion had processed like cargo had on their own without anyone's help already been fighting their way back before Elena ever reached the chamber. "They didn't choose us because we were weak," she told the board, her voice steady despite the exhaustion behind it. "They chose us because they thought we'd be easy. They were wrong, and it frightened them enough to try to erase the evidence rather than adjust their plan. That should tell you everything about what's coming next." The board was silent for a long moment after she finished. In the end, the disciplinary charges were quietly dropped. Not out of mercy, Elena suspected, but because 200 rescued colonists and Rahal's smuggled data made her insubordination impossible to punish without looking like the very kind of bureaucratic negligence that had let Meridian fall in the first place. Reyes kept his ship. Elena kept her rank, and gained, not long after, something she hadn't expected. A new posting, drafted specifically in response to her testimony, tasked with preparing Earth's colonies for a threat that Fleet Command could no longer afford to treat as hypothetical. She visited Thomas before she left for that posting. He'd moved into temporary housing near the coast with Mira's mother and their daughter, who was too young to remember any of it, which Elena found she was grateful for in a way that surprised her. "You could stay," Thomas said, watching her from the doorway as she packed. "You've done enough. Let someone else carry it for a while." "I can't," Elena said. "Not because I don't want to, because I saw what happens when Earth looks away and hopes it won't happen again." She zipped her bag closed. "Sale said they'd come back with a better method. I intend to make sure we're not easy the second time either." Tomas didn't argue. He just hugged her, the way he had when they were kids and the world felt too big for either of them to manage alone, and told her to come home when she could. 6 months later, Elena stood on the rebuilt ground of Meridian Colony, watching new buildings rise where the old ones had stood empty, listening to the sound of people, real, imperfect, arguing, laughing people, moving through streets that had once held nothing but silence and an open door. A message arrived while she watched the construction, routed through channels she hadn't used in months, encrypted in an old Cartesi cipher she'd learned to recognize during the debrief. She opened it standing right there in the plaza and had to read it twice before she believed it. "Commander Voss, I did not die in the chamber, though I imagine you assumed I had. I disabled Sale's override before the guards restrained me fully, then used the confusion to reach an escape pod meant for station personnel. I have spent the last months in hiding, uncertain whether it was safe to reach out, uncertain whether I deserved to. I am told the colonists recovered well. I hope that is true. I hope in some small way It was worth what it cost. Rawl. Elena sat down right there on the plaza steps and read it a third time, and let herself cry for the first time since Meridian had gone silent. Not from grief this time, but from something closer to relief. The kind that comes when a debt you thought could never be repaid gets paid anyway, quietly, by someone who never asked for anything in return. She wrote back that same afternoon. It was the beginning of a correspondence, careful and slow, between a human commander and a Cartesi defector who had chosen, against everything his own people had built him to become someone worth trusting. The following year, Earth Fleet formally adopted a new colonial defense doctrine. No quiet withdrawals, no diplomatic patience extended to any force that threatened a human settlement. No more assuming that silence from a colony meant anything other than the worst. Helena was given command of the task force built to enforce it, a role she hadn't asked for and wasn't sure she wanted, but accepted anyway, because someone had to, and because she understood, better than most, exactly what was coming. She stood on Meridian's rebuilt ground the day the policy was announced, looking up at a sky that had once seemed to hold nothing but silence and loss, and thought about Sale's last words before the station died. "We will return with a better method," and found to her own quiet surprise that she wasn't afraid. Earth had tried patience once. It had tried quiet diplomacy, careful procedure, the belief that following the rules would keep its people safe. Meridian had shown, in the cruelest way possible, exactly what that patience cost. It would not make that mistake again. Somewhere above her, construction crews called to each other across scaffolding. Children's voices drifted from a rebuilt schoolyard, and the wind moved through streets that had once stood silent and empty, and now, finally, breathed with life again. Elena Voss picked the small shoe up from where she'd set it weeks ago, on a memorial marker bearing names of the lost. She held it for a moment, the way she had the day she found it, and then set it back down gently among the flowers already growing there. Humanity had not survived Meridian because it was stronger than what came for it. It had survived because it refused, in the end, to stay broken. And that, more than any weapon Earth would ever build, was the thing the galaxy would learn to respect.